All right. I think it's about time. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being on the call today. My name is Marina. I'll be your host on behalf of NuRelm. We are so excited to have you join us for the kickoff of our webinar series, Technology for Human Behavior and Intervention Research. The topic today is building your research study mobile or web application. We are recording this webinar and it will be available later on our website. We encourage you to put questions in the Q&A section for Sam to answer later on in the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce our incredible speaker today, Sam Shaaban, co-founder and CEO of NuRelm. If you don't know him, he's a great guy to get connected with. He really knows his way around the industry. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sam.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks, Marina. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. This is our first webinar in a series, and we're really hoping to use some of the things that we've learned over the years of doing this sort of work to share what we hope will be useful information. Like Marina said, please put your questions into the Q&A as we go. We'll answer them at the end. But also, if you have suggestions on the webinar or ideas for topics, upcoming topics, please let us know in the survey that you'll get at the end of this presentation. So with that, let's get started. So we'll get to the good stuff very soon. I just want to very quickly introduce myself, just so you can evaluate whether or not you should listen to me on these topics and why. So I'm the co-founder of NuRelm. We have been around for a while, for 25 years, doing custom software development. And we do a lot of work with a lot of different industries. We work with for-profits and nonprofits and entrepreneurs and government agencies. But in the last decade or so, the majority of our work has been with academic researchers. So we really love this market and we know this world well. And I think we have some good experience to offer you some good advice. I think maybe the skill that we've gotten the best at over the 25 years is hiring and keeping amazing people. Everybody's been at NuRelm at least an average of 6 years. And I think we're getting very good at finding and keeping awesome clients. So we really love this work. We're located in Pittsburgh. Most of us are located in Pittsburgh. We have a few remote employees. And I think that's it. I think that's all you need to know about me. Now let's talk about you. I think that based on the title of the webinar, you're probably somebody who's involved in doing scientific research of some sort in some way. So we are making the assumption that you love what you do and that you decided not to be a software engineer for a reason, and that's because you don't like it and that's not what you want to do. So you're thinking about the work that you do and the software that you have to build for it. And you're just thinking about the ways to go about it, who to work with, what kind of things to help, what kind of ideas could help guide you through the process. So we're hoping that this presentation will give you a lot of good advice along the lines of how to build a mobile app or a web app or any of the things in between as you work on your next project. Here's a handful of our clients just to give you an idea of universities that we work with, but real quick disclosure, we are a for-profit company. We do the kind of work that we're talking about here, but I'm trying really hard not to imply that NuRelm is the only company that can do this, or you have to use us. There are a ton of ways to get what I'm about to share with you done. We provide one of them, but I don't want to imply that we're the only ones that can do it. Sometimes we lead grants as well, small business innovation and research grants. I'll talk a little bit about that. And we've done a little bit of work with licensing IP from universities, although we haven't officially kind of closed the deal on the first one. But just wanted to let you know, we are a for-profit company and we do this sort of thing. This presentation is the distillation, the short and sweet version of a white paper that we wrote last year. So if you want the whole enchilada, give us a shout, email me, check out the little QR code that pops up in the bottom right of some of these slides. I tested it. It's big enough to scan with your phone during the presentation, but just let us know and we'll get it to you. There's a lot more detail there. And certainly if you have any questions, we'd be happy to chat and talk about those things. So big questions for us to answer today. We'll try to give you an overview of kind of the big picture of developing a software project for a research app. What we'll talk about is not all specific to research. It will apply to a lot of different types of projects. So if you're not a researcher or a scientist, you're not necessarily in the wrong place, but we'll use a lot of examples of research projects that we've done with the idea that if most of the people here are doing research, those will be things that you can relate to. We'll talk a bit about why apps are useful and maybe talk about some kind of intuitive use cases and maybe some sort of stranger use cases, just to give you a feel for the universe in which apps make sense for research studies. We'll talk a lot about planning for an app because I think that is the linchpin to a successful software development project. You don't have to plan, but if you don't, there are a lot of surprises. Some of them are painful. So I think the more planning you can do, the better. We'll talk a lot about that. We'll talk a little bit about how to build it. Now, I promise that we will not talk about my favorite code editor or my favorite programming language or anything at that level of detail. If you would like to speak about those things, please give us a call. I would be happy to, but I don't want to put everybody here to sleep or most people here to sleep. But we'll talk about what I think are some useful ideas for development process and what you should be looking for. And then finally, we'll talk about how to launch this thing once you've built it and how to kind of keep it going through the life of your study. And then we'll get to a Q&A section. So we'll start out who needs a research app and really maybe some of the whys in terms of why you might use an app or build software for a research project. So, one of the maybe most obvious reasons to use some sort of software tool in your research is just to make things either easier or really to make them possible. So, many of you are familiar with this idea of EMAs. And for those of you who don't know that acronym, that stands for Ecological Momentary Assessment. So this simple tool that's been used for quite a while. When you would like to sort of dip into a participant in your study's environment and ask them a question, how are you feeling right now at a random time during the day? Or, what's your mood right now? Or what are you doing right now? Maybe you could figure out how to do that with some sort of phone call based way or a web survey. But, boy, it would be a lot easier if you could just pop up a notification or a text message on somebody's phone to get that information. So, that's a use case that I think a lot of you are familiar with. Other use cases in the make it easier possible are use cases such as collecting passive sensor data. I'll show you an example in a few minutes where we've done this, where you really want to collect continuous measures of a participant's activity level or location or mood or whatever in ways that maybe, if not impossible, incredibly hard to collect if you didn't have some sort of mobile app to do that. So other reasons, extending your reach, lowering your costs. I think this is a great reason to use an app. And the thing that comes to mind for me is when you've got something that can be an in-person intervention or an in-person data collection step, moving that to a web application or a mobile app, really, really speeds up the process and lowers your cost structure and allows you to do so much more with the limited budgets that we all have for research. These are typically things where you're keeping a human in the loop, but you're putting them in the right place instead of, requiring scheduling and in-person visits. You've still got somebody maybe that makes sure what's being done is correct, but they're doing so in a way that's much more efficient. And then finally, on this list, speaking of efficiency, moving a task that is, pen and paper to some web-based version, things like that are helped by any sort of app. And we've all lived this with everything that we use and do online. But, in the case of an example, I'll show you in a few minutes, moving a safety planning process from a pen and paper kind of process to an online version where clinicians can work with adolescents to put together a safety plan, again, like really speeds up the process and makes things much more efficient. So I would like to show you. So I'm going to start out with a couple of examples. And a lot of the examples in this presentation are behavioral health related examples, but you can apply this to a lot of other stuff. We built apps. We built an app a few years ago that connected to a force sensor that was connected to a prosthetic lower limb, and the app helped people show them how to walk properly based on the feedback from that force sensor. So there's a bunch of stuff you can do, but I'm just going to give you some of the more recent work that we've done. These are a few screenshots of a project that we have been working on for quite a few years with the University of Pittsburgh called the Bright app. And this is funded by National Institute of Mental Health. And it's the center, it's a center grant at Pitt called Etudes. That's a long acronym that I won't read you the whole thing of now, but we've been working on this app from the very kernel of an idea through to a much larger system that I'll show you in a bit for many years. And the idea is it's an intervention for adolescents with depression or suicidal thoughts. And the tool has been really successful, and we've worked through a long process to get here. But in terms of engagement, this had to have a nice design. Adolescents are a very discerning audience. We had to make sure that we built it for both iOS and Android. If you look at the numbers, you'll see that they look like they're split pretty evenly, Apple users versus Android users. But if you look more closely, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the demographics aren't so even. So, if you want to get a fair sample of folks, it's a good idea to build for both. This is an example of a project where the functionality really evolved as the researchers took it to users and did focus groups, and we built other features on top of that. So it's a really great example of kind of starting small and then adding as we knew more about the audience. And then finally, I already mentioned IP owned by Pitt. Took a while to build, but the takeaway in the context of why build an app is that this is probably a pretty classic example of an app, a behavioral intervention, a tool that you give the participants that lives on their phone that you collect data from. So, I wanted to start with an example of something that's maybe not exactly obvious in its full extent, but something that you're probably more familiar with. And then I wanted to show you an example or talk through an example that's maybe a less obvious why would I build an app. This is a project we worked on with some researchers at Yale a couple of years ago now. And the idea is pretty cool. There's this sensor, it's called Smoke Beat. It's this thing you wear on your smoking wrist. And as you do smoking motions, it sends a signal somewhere that you can use to do things like trigger interventions of some sort. So that's what we did. But the interesting part of this, aside from the kind of neat and strange smoking detector, is that this app or this project got funded right around the beginning of COVID. So the idea was users, participants would receive some money for not smoking, not vaping, and they would go into the lab, daily or weekly. I can't remember the frequency, but there would be a person there that would administer the saliva swab, and they would say, "Oh, you haven't vaped for a while. Here's your money." Well, no way to do that with COVID, so we sort of had to all stop and think about how do we do this thing? And we ended up building, I think, a really clever online system where users could very easily upload a timestamp video, and then somebody could review that video and then, administer this reward based on that. So initially we thought, oh man, COVID, showstopper, this whole study is goofed up. But I think we ended up actually making the whole study a little less expensive, or at least allowing the PI on the project to move their budget to a different place in the project. So it went really well. So I wanted to throw that out as a why build something that has an interesting twist at the end, since there are lots of interesting reasons why you can do this sort of stuff. So all right, so that's a little background of kind of motivation, but now let's get to the good stuff. So we think about building an app for a project or building software for a project in these three big chunks: plan, build, and then launch slash maintain. And my suggestion is that they should all take up equal real estate in your brain because they're all really important. It's really easy to skimp on the planning step, and it's maybe really easy not to realize how much goes into the launch and maintain step. We tend to focus on building. So I'd like to talk a lot about planning because I think it is the keystone of every great project. And planning really starts back at the grant application. We often work with our partners at this early stage and do what we call some brainstorming and budgeting sessions to figure out like what's feasible, what fits into the plan, what kind of software they might want to build, and then really budgeting for that when a grant goes in, even though we know it's going to take a while before it gets funded. Why so much planning? Well, I like to think about this rule of thumb. This is, an approximation, but I think it really makes sense on for a lot of things in life. But I think the cost of fixing a mistake goes up by an order of magnitude or so every successive stage that you wait to fix it. So, let me give you an example. What do I mean by this? Think about you're talking to your team and you're jotting down some requirements of a thing that you want to build. You've got an app that you want to build. Well, you come up with a reason why a lot of that's wrong. In your third meeting, the cost of updating that text-only document is minimal. You're modifying a Word document. Well, think about taking that requirements document and turning it into a design or set of wireframes or some sort of visual sketch of your app. Well, if you want to revamp that, it's still going to cost something. It's much more significant than updating this text document, but it's not the end of the world. You can do it. It's not going to be a huge deal. Now, skip ahead a lot of steps later. You've got an app. It's finished. 100 study participants are using it, and you realize that there's a major flaw in the workflow or a major bug that nobody found. Well, now it's a big problem. It's much more expensive. You've got to make updates. You need to redeploy this thing into app stores. You've got to get users to re-download it. And maybe you have a big problem because you've had to change the app in a way that makes it inconsistent for the first users who use the first version versus the last user. So the point is, as with so much in our lives, dealing with things early really reduces the pain as we move. So all right, so how do we plan? I would caution anybody not to think too deeply about why we selected these icons for each of these items, other than their food related icons. But shrimps are probably not the best representation of grant mechanisms, but bear with me. But the idea is there are a lot of ingredients that go into the planning soup, and I want to cover at least a few of them. I won't go over everything today, but you can for sure ask questions, or we can talk later if you have any questions. But let's dive right in. I think an easy one to think about, well, an easy one not to think about, and an easy one to solve early, one that fits in that kind of 10x rule is IP. You're going to build something in this project, your project, that is potentially valuable. Maybe one day it'll be licensed, maybe it won't. But I guess the takeaway here is it's always so easy to negotiate with your collaborators and any partners that you have about how IP will be handled early. And it's always less easy, if anybody cares about it, to think through these things later in a project. So just, internally within universities, everybody's got their invention disclosure process. I think it's worth thinking about that as early as you can. Typically, if you're a vendor, we're often a vendor in projects like this. the institution that you work for will negotiate a good, solid agreement that says the IP is owned by the university. That's probably not a problem. But sometimes you're working with external partners. Like I mentioned earlier, we often work with the folks who, some of the folks who hired us later will end up working with them in a small business innovation and research grant where we're the lead on the grant. So we always try to be really, really careful to make sure that our partners have what they want in terms of IP. If the idea ever turns into a company, we want to make sure that their wishes are respected in terms of where they would want to be within that company. So maybe not everybody thinks so carefully about that, but you should. I think it's really important to think about these things early. So it's kind of an easy one, but it's one that's worth thinking about. It's like so many other things, easy to not think about too. When you're thinking about finding a partner who is going to be your software development partner, I'll list a few things. I don't think that the first few things are essential. I'll get to one at the end that I think really is important, but I think they're all really nice to have. So it's really useful to find a partner who's done something similar before, and you can look at it and see that it's good. It got finished, it got delivered. Not essential. We have not always been a partner who has had experience doing exactly everything. It's impossible, but I think it's worth looking for with folks. It's also useful to think about somebody who's got, sorry if you all hear a helicopter landing outside. I don't know how loud it is on your end, but it's great to find somebody who has experience collaborating on research projects, understanding how university purchasing processes work and how IRBs work and how studies are put together is really useful because there are some nuances there. Again, not essential, but it's a nice sort of profile to have for somebody who you're going to work with. And then I think this gets more important. Think about whether whatever team you're working with to develop the tools that you need can scale up to the size of your project. If you're going to collect a ton of data and it's going to be really resource intensive, just make sure that the group that you're working with can do that, but also make sure that they have all the various skills that you need. There typically a lot of skills go into development. It's, most projects require front end development and design and database development, a bunch of things. Just make sure that's all there. And then finally, I think most important to me is finding a team or a person or a group that is enjoyable to work with that you trust. I think that's really the key thing. I think you can solve a lot of problems in the other three areas if you find someone that you're willing to work with, who's willing to really trust you and you're willing to trust them, and they've got some good basic skills. All right. In terms of working relationships, I think there are a lot of different ways that you can work with a partner that's going to build a software tool. And I think about these in terms of a few things: cost, experience, continuity, versatility, and personality. So let me give you some examples and I can talk through these. So collaborating with a colleague is a great way to find somebody that you can click with. So I mentioned personality is an important thing. Somebody that you like and trust. Probably like and trust your colleague, or you wouldn't be collaborating with them. Maybe this is a good benefit in terms of cost. Maybe they have the right experience. The question is whether they'll be around throughout your whole study and able to support it. Things like that are important to think about. But that's definitely a common and good option, is to collaborate with a team that at your institution. You might hire somebody directly, especially if you've got a couple of projects and you need a data manager for each of them. It might make sense to hire somebody like that who's relatively inexpensive. Cost is pretty good compared to hiring a contractor to do this. They may have great experience. They may not have the versatility you need. One person can't do everything. They can't be a visual designer and a technical designer and a database architect and all this stuff, but they may fit perfectly within the team that you already have, being sort of that one element that you need. Professional developers, folks like us, are going to be more expensive typically than hiring somebody. But presumably, if you've done a good job checking them out, they're going to have the right experience and they're going to have the right versatility. You hope that they're going to have the personality, that you're going to like them. You'll try to figure that out when you talk to them initially. And if it's a company that's been around, I think you can think that they're going to have the continuity to help you out. Freelancers or students definitely have a cost advantage. They're maybe oftentimes the least expensive option. Maybe disadvantages on experience and continuity, particularly students who will be gone soon. So lots of pros and cons there, but definitely they can fit into the mix of your team. And then, there are opportunities for sort of hybrid partners. We often work with folks who we developed a great relationship with, who have an idea that maybe doesn't fit into that no longer fits into the sort of scientific funding paradigm, but is ready to be commercialized. So sometimes we'll work with folks to submit a commercialization grant, an SBIR, a Small Business Innovation and Research Grant, where we're hybrid in that we work together to get funding for a project, and then we can also provide some of the development effort on that project. So just a strange twist that you could consider as well. But at any rate, think about who you want to work with and think about these 5 elements: cost, experience, continuity, versatility, and personality. All right, moving on to the next ingredient to think about as you're planning your app. This is really sort of maybe seems like a subtle distinction, but it's really an important one. These aren't real screenshots, they're just wireframes, but you'll notice that the one on the left looks a lot like the one on the right, except it looks as though it's operating within a web browser. So the difference between these, just to define kind of some terminology, the one on the left is a web app or a mobile responsive app, and the screenshot on the right is a mobile app or a native mobile app, an app that gets built and delivered via an app store. And the question is, what's the difference? Well, one of the big differences is cost. It's a lot less expensive to build the version on the left, something that operates inside your web browser. It's easier to build and not quite as taxing in terms of the requirements to build it. You don't have to submit it to an app store. You don't have to worry about submitting it to multiple app stores and building it for multiple platforms. So we think, maybe between 3 and 5 times less expensive to build a mobile responsive web app. However, it oftentimes makes sense. You might say, why should you ever build a native app? It makes sense to do that if you really need to rely on the functionality of the phone. Notifications, push notifications, using the deep sensor functionality of these supercomputers we all have in our pockets. If you want to hold GPS data or activity data, in real time from a user, a native app makes a lot of sense. And I'll show you an example of a project that kind of illustrates this right now. So this is a project that we're just actually wrapping this up. This was an SBIR. It was a 3-year project that was the NuRelm applied for. And it's a really cool project. One of our collaborators came to us with this idea, and then we worked together to get this funded. And it's a fast track SBIR, so it was a fairly big project. And the idea is we want to collect passive sensor data from adolescents with mild depression and try to make collect a bunch of data about their activity level, how far they've gone from home each day, their screen time, pour that all into a machine learning model and come up with some sort of prediction as to how their mood is changing each week. And we have a lot of reasons to use that. Help them with self-efficacy, maybe connect them to their clinician or their guardians. But at any rate, this is an app that really, really made use of the sensor data of the phone. So we actually are using right now another app called Aware to collect that sensor data, but in hopefully a future phase, we'll put that functionality into this app. But for now, this app does use push notifications, which made it make a lot of sense to build as an app. just quick notes. It's a pretty complex application, but we really had to spend, just like that Bright app, we really needed to spend a lot of time on design to make sure the audience would be engaged with this app. So that was a big part of the project. So anyway, that was my why build a more expensive native mobile app example, if you're wondering why I threw that in at this point. All right. Next ingredient on the planning list, data portals. So every app, not, I guess not every app, most apps will require some sort of web-based portal where you can store information about participants or content that you're going to deliver via that app, or gather data into one place so you can sort of aggregate that data somewhere. So even mobile apps need this. So it's not just a mobile app that lives on the phone, but there's got to be some sort of portal that lives on a web server somewhere. And I'll just give you some examples. These are things that can range from really basic to really sophisticated. So maybe you just need a portal where you and your research assistants can go in, add a new participant. Marina is a new participant in this project. Boom. Or maybe you need one that does that, but it also lets you manage some of the content that's going to be displayed in your mobile app. So, you're going to have activities or exercises, and you want the research team to be able to enter them somewhere. So you might do that on this portal. Getting more sophisticated, maybe you want to sync this thing with other study tools. Maybe you're using RedCap or Qualtrics, and you need to pull data from there, and you need to sort of harmonize or link it with data that you're getting from the app and see it all in one place. That's something you can do. And then maybe you need to coordinate between multiple apps and touch points. So quick example there. This is a project that was built after that Bright app project that I showed you earlier called iChart. And this is really just a really complex, sophisticated portal that pulls data from the mobile app that we talked about, a screening app called Screening Wizard, a safety planning and sort of instructional web app called Guide to Bright, pulls it all into one place and kind of provides the interfaces to do work in all those places. So just an interesting example of a really sophisticated portal, which I think ends up being something you need in most projects. So, next on the list is kind of the rules that you need to think about. And I'm not going to go into those in any detail at all here. This is kind of a cool chart that I just had to renew my human subjects training the other day. And I've found this chart on one of the slides. And it's kind of cool. There's so many different rules. I won't talk about these, but there's so many things that we always wonder about. When is HIPAA compliance required? When do we need to think about FDA regulation? What are the local rules? So I'll just say this is good to think through all these things and kind of talk through, but I'll point out that the one that I think most researchers are familiar with and need to think a lot about is the so-called common rule, this federal code that applies to human subjects regulation. This is the one that your institutional review boards are using to think about whether your study's okay to go forward or not, and really, really where you'll always start in a research setting. All right, so we talked a lot about planning. What happens at the end of this planning process? Typically, you want to write down your decisions somewhere. And one way to discuss that, or one way to refer to that, is a requirements document of some sort. You're going to document who's going to use this app, what users are going to use it, what does each user need to be able to do, what's the thing going to look like, what kind of content's going to be in it, what kind of functionality are you going to use. All these sorts of decisions that you've made all through this process need to go into some document somewhere, including timeline and budget. So I'll tell you that it's really easy to say build a really good requirements document, but in practice, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of decision making you have to make as to sort of how detailed you want to make that document. So, it's really easy to create a document that's low detail. In fact, it's really easy to create no document at all And the result of that is lots and lots of surprises, and not maybe not the good kind of surprises like you get on your birthday. Lots of surprises about, in the vein of things that you didn't think of, they're going to cost money that you didn't want to do or you don't want to do. And it's also possible to aspire to documenting every single detail of the entire project. And that's good if you can do it. And I think it makes sense sometimes, but it's very challenging to maintain a document where you document every single thing. I think, I can't tell you exactly how to do this. It's something that maybe varies for each project, but there's definitely a Goldilocks zone of requirements planning. And it's probably to the right of center on this low to high detail. It's maybe closer to high detail, because if you don't really think about a lot of the things that we talked about here, you can get yourself into trouble. But maybe you can create a pretty good plan and note what decisions still are yet to be made in that plan so that you're at least aware of those. All right, so one concept that I think is really useful that I want to mention once you get to this requirements document phase is this idea of a minimum viable project. So I'll start with the suggestion that it's pretty rare that the perfect app the app of your dreams for your research study is going to cost less than the budget you have available. In fact, it's pretty common that the opposite is true. So a really nice process or thought process to use here is, what is the most basic version that you can build of this thing that would lead to a successful study such that you can do the very minimum things very minimum of things that need to be done in a way that you've done each really, really well. Um, I think that's a key question because it's really easy to plan too much. And it's really easy to get duped by thinking that this software development process, each item that you want to add is probably pretty easy, but once you add 100 of them, you end up with a really complex app that's really expensive and really hard to test. So, um, scaling back as far as you can scale back such that you do what you do really well is such an important tool. And then, a well-done minimum viable product, an MVP, it is the foundation for future work. Two examples of that, and I'll just go through these quickly. We're working on a project now, a really great project with a researcher at ASU called Engaging Families. It's a mobile app for parenting skills. I won't tell you all the details about it, but it's the audience is parents. We did focus on only one. We did choose to only go with one platform, Android, rather than Android and Apple. And then we trimmed a bunch of features initially because we really wanted certain features. We really wanted to have really good data tracking. So we put off some of the things like push notifications initially with the plan that this is going to be a foundational app that can be built upon later. And we were successful. This was an early career development award, a K award, for those of you who are familiar with that language. So it wasn't a huge budget, but we really were able to work together collaboratively to figure out how to scale this back so that it does what it needs to do really, really well. But doesn't do some of the things that would be cool, but maybe would fit better into a later phase. Another example, back to that Bright app, years after we launched the initial app, we went back and added multiple language support. It happens to be two really challenging languages, Hebrew and Arabic. They're right to left, which is always a trickier thing to deal with in terms of layout. But again, they started out with this kind of minimum viable product, and then we went back and added the things that needed to be added. Next in the planning list, once you've got this requirements document and you've figured out what you want to scale back, if anything, you really want to think about the design. And user experience planning is something that happens much earlier in the process, and it's something that's really important, and it's worthy of its own webinar, which we will eventually have. We're working on ideas for that soon. But you end up with taking this idea document, this requirements document, and generating simple sketches that we'll call wireframes. I'll show you some examples in a few minutes of that, or in the very next slide, actually. You'll think about accessibility as you start to think about final designs and styles. And then finally, you'll come up with what the app is actually going to look like. So let me show you a couple of quick examples, just so I don't go too fast through here. Final designs combined with wireframes and the requirements document should give your dev team most of what they need to build what they're going to build. So let's start with these low fidelity designs, these wireframes that I mentioned earlier. So this isn't a clear picture, but it doesn't need to be. You get the idea. This is like a really simple black and white, black and gray view of what an app is gonna look like. Like, what are the screens in the app? What are the buttons going to be? What's the navigation going to work? How's the navigation going to work? And as you can see, there are sticky notes here. There are a lot of great tools out there that make it really easy to collaborate, so that clients and the people designing this can kind of ask questions within it and really fine tune the flow of an app and how everything's going to work before you start really obsessing over the details, the colors, the branding, all that sort of stuff. And then once you've agreed on that, you can take those and turn them into high fidelity, nice final designs. Maybe you don't design each and every single screen of the app, but you definitely end up designing every element that's going to be used in the app, so that the front end team that's developing the app knows what everything is going to look like. They don't have any questions. And this is a little fun thing that you can do that I think is really useful in a research setting. You can take those high fidelity designs in most of the tools that are out there now and turn them into these sort of clickable, interactive apps that they're not really apps. Nobody's done any development work. You've simply wired up certain clicks to go to certain screens. And these are really useful, not just for you as the researcher, but for your user, your focus groups, so that people can actually play around with something that feels a heck of a lot like the final app, even though it doesn't, really work. It just gives you something that you can play with. So this is a really nice final step. And all right, so there's a ton more to planning and a lot more that we can talk about, but we'll move on very quickly to the build phase. Now, I promised I wasn't going to put you to sleep, so don't worry about this next screen that looks like I'm going to talk about a lot of detailed stuff, but I just wanted to lay out a couple of ideas for you about what building an app looks like in a really nice structured environment. So my suggestion is whoever your partner is that's building an app should have some really good structure in place, some good process in place for how to do that. So code should be, we call it revision controlled. It should, you should use a tool. There are a lot of tools out there. The most popular one is called Git, but there should be a nice system so that you can always roll back to an earlier version of the code. You can see who did what when. Your your developers should have code reviews when they submit some code that's going to go into the main code base. It should be looked at by somebody else. There should be a lot of testing, unit testing, functional testing, QA, and there should be careful task management. There should be a nice way so that when you meet them, hopefully every week, at least during the beginning of the development process, you can know what's coming up. They should be able to tell you what's coming up next. So I'm not going to talk in any more detail about this build phase because I think it's the one that we always focus on. But I'd be happy to talk to anybody or answer any questions about it if you like it. But I think the takeaway is there should just be lots of transparency. You should be talking to your development team very often because it's really easy for the development of a project to go this way and you're thinking to go that way. And unless you talk, those things can really diverge. All right, so I skipped past the build phase to get to the other section that I told you I think is really important, which is you finally built this thing, you're ready to launch it. You're going to launch it and then forget about it. That's not correct. You're going to launch it and there's going to be a lot of work that's left over. And there's a lot of planning to do, even for the launch. So just a smattering of things that you'll need to think about before you launch an app. If it's a mobile app, do you have accounts at the app stores where you're going to deploy it? Does the software work well with your consent process? How are you going to onboard new participants in such a way that's efficient? Can they onboard themselves as far as the software is concerned, or do you need to have like your research assistant help them? If there's a problem with a user and a data is not coming through, or something bad is happening, will you know in time to prevent losing a participant? How will you handle that? And I think a really important one is, can you handle a large inflow of data? It's great when you test an app with 5 users, and then it's not so great when you test it with 500 and nothing works anymore. So these are all things that you have to think about, all part of the planning process that we talked about, but certainly things that you need to be ready to answer before you get to the launch phase. So finally, you launch the app and then you maintain it. So last sort of nuts and bolts slide before we get to questions. This is how we think about post-launch, the maintenance of an app. Initially, in the first month or two, or whatever the appropriate time frame is, you should think about having the resources on hand such that you can plan for surprises. Having real humans use your app is a great way to find all kinds of stuff that you didn't notice before. Real participants will push you in the app in exciting new ways that you may not like, but having people on hand to help figure out any problems is really important. Once that's over, you can plan and budget for less intense support, but the lifetime of your study, you're going to need minor feature updates, and there are going to be security updates to the libraries you're using, bugs maybe. People are going to ask you for data. So, it makes sense to have a team on hand to help with these things. And then finally, at the end of the project, you're going to end up, you're going to need to remove the app from the App Store and get rid of any domain names you have and get data pulled for whatever you're going to need and delete the data off the cloud account. There's a bunch of things that you're going to need to do at the very end of a project as well that you'll need to plan for. So that's it. Let me give you a quick summary. Excellent planning is key. Remember this 10x rule. Every phase that you wait before you change something is going to cost more and more and more. Planning and communication will reduce a lot of unpleasant surprises of all sorts. It's easy to skip, but it's really important to do. Can you simplify? Once you get this planning done, what can you trim? I think that's a concept that's gonna help you a ton. And then finally, find a development partner that you like and trust, and talk to them a lot, especially through development. It's really important. And don't forget that the app doesn't end once it's built. In fact, some people like to say that's when everything starts, is once it's built. So don't forget to budget for that. And that's it. I hope that was useful. If anybody has any questions, we'd love to take them now. And if you have questions that we can answer later, feel free to reach out to us.
Yes, that was great. Thank you so much, Sam. It was really insightful. Yeah, if you have questions, you can go ahead and enter them into the Q&A section. But before I ask the first question, I just want to remind everybody that we have a super quick survey that appears in your browser when the webinar ends. So just ask you how you found out about us. If you could spare a couple seconds to answer that, it would be phenomenal. Okay, so we do have a question here, which is, okay. What do you say to researchers who want an app but are not yet at the point? They don't know what they want, or because funding isn't available.
That's a great and fun question. That's a situation that we deal with quite often. I'm not sure how common it is, but something that we're happy to do. It's fun and it's a good investment in a future relationship. Is we're always happy to do sort of a brainstorming session. Just the other day, well, I guess just the other month, we just had a meeting recently. Somebody that we know introduced us to somebody who was interested in something like this. Like they had an idea, they wanted to study dyads, and they were thinking about a way to indicate or to note when two people were close to each other in physical proximity. So we did a lot of brainstorming. We asked one of our awesome developers, Bruno, to do a little bit of research, and came up with sort of a proof of concept idea and a budget that they're taking to go get, to shop around basically for different grant mechanisms or department funds. So I think you should be able to find a developer that's willing to work with you on that sort of stuff, who's willing to sort of invest a little bit in the process, to help you out. We love doing that kind of work because it's sort of always a fun problem to figure those things out.
Okay, that's great. We do have two more questions. Um, let's see here. So how much time should a researcher budget to develop a basic data collection app as part of a grant?
That's I hate giving an
Yeah.
it depends answer, but boy, it really depends on the
Yeah.
content. So, if it's, if you want to do a simple survey, not much time. You could use Redcap or Qualtrics or any of a lot of survey tools out there, and you wouldn't necessarily have to build anything. But, if the data that you want to collect is passive sensor data, about people's activity or their, accelerometer data from a watch, that would be much, much bigger. I would say that is worth kind of a scoping session with somebody that can talk through, take your basic requirements and turn it into a budget. So sorry that that's a no answer, but it definitely is it depends one.
Um, okay. If a web app is mobile friendly, why do I need a mobile app?
Yeah, good question. And I didn't talk a ton about that, but the difference between that's a great question because a web-friendly app is so much less expensive than a mobile app. So I think about two reasons why you might want a mobile app. One of them is perception. If your audience, is more inclined to take a mobile app that has a link on their, screen, seriously, that's something that your user testing can help you reveal. But I think the more important reason is if you need to really use the deep functionality of a mobile device, then a native mobile app makes more sense. So what does that mean? Let's say, for example, you'd like to send push notifications to your participants. Mobile app makes that a lot easier. Maybe there are some ways to figure that out without using a mobile app, like maybe sending text messages. But really, if you want to collect data, accelerometer data, or GPS data, or screen time information, then you're really pushing toward a mobile app much more.
Okay. Here's one. As a client, what information or updates do you think we should ask from the developers? How often should these updates be?
Oh yeah, good question. We suggest that when we work with folks that once development starts, we suggest meeting at least once a week, to go over our questions to clients and clients' questions back to us. But I think really even before that, it makes sense to think through kind of the milestones that you'd like to accomplish in a project, and then think about the dates for those milestones. So um, really lots and lots of transparency about what's going to get done when, what do you expect from us as a client, when should we have it to you? And really a good question is, what things do you need from us that if you don't get are going to hold up the launch of our project? Is there content that you need from us, or do you need final designs or requirements from us? Otherwise, if you get those here, it's going to take 2 months to launch it. So if we're 2 months late, we'll have a problem.
Okay. So this one is from Ephraim. What happens to the app once the research project comes to an end? Could apps be repurposed?
Yeah, definitely. So the app is your property, and by your I mean your probably your institution's property if you've funded it through research dollars, but the property of whoever the vendor is building it for. So you probably are going to take it off of the app store initially unless you are repurposing it. So you can certainly do that. So a lot of our clients will have a plan for an app that they're going to use in future studies, or they may have a plan where it's not a thing they want to study anymore because they got good results from the study, but they then want to commercialize the app. So lots of future directions you could go: further study with the app, shelve it, um, or maybe commercialize the app. You could work with a small business like us in the commercialization grant space to get money to do that, or you could go out and raise money other ways to do something with it. But I would suggest that that's going to take some work with your licensing office to do that at a university. But they're licensing offices are always super happy to get their technology licensed, so they ought to be pretty cooperative in helping you figure that out if that's the direction you want to go.
Got a lot of really great questions coming in. So here's one. Some of these are anonymous. Can I bring a raw idea to your team for consideration of an SBIR or STTR grant that you would apply for on our behalf?
Yeah, certainly. We do that. We like projects like that. We don't, we'll tell you if an idea doesn't fit in our, isn't in our wheelhouse or is something that we wouldn't be a good partner for. And once we sort of agree on something that is a good idea, we'll work on the grant submission collaboratively. So we know a lot about how to submit a good grant, but we won't we'll rely on you to do the science part of the submission, obviously, because it's not our idea, it's yours. But we can help with the commercialization plan. We're pretty good at helping kind of hone the significance. And you'll see it like in the case of an NIH grant, SBIRs are very, very similar. There's just this kind of added twist of how you'll commercialize it. So yeah, for sure, that's a great thing to bring. We like thinking through those sorts of projects, and we'll give you advice that's hopefully useful, even if it's not working with us on the SBIR.
Okay. We have maybe time for one more. What does maintenance involve? Can you elaborate on who is responsible for catching bugs, who is notified of security updates?
Yeah, good question. Like very nice, detailed question.
Yes.
Before we deploy an app, I mentioned that testing a lot is really important. So we try to test in a few different ways. Our backend developers write what are called unit tests, these kind of automatic tests that make sure that when you add a new feature, you don't break an old feature. We do QA, quality assurance, which is really code for a person with a plan that just kind of goes through and tests things before they get launched, like actually test the interface of an app. We work with our clients to test. So the person who owns the app is going to do a lot of testing, but then you're going to launch it. And typically after launch, you're really going to be monitoring people's usage of the app to find bugs. So finding a bug is going to be something that's probably reported by a participant. So part of the post-launch process needs to have some sort of bug reporting system. The research assistant that they're going to call is going to let somebody know if there's a problem. We work with clients, the vendor, the person who built the software should be helping understand security issues. So if there's a update of a library that's being released because there's a big problem with security, the vendor who built the app should make one aware of that. And then another part of maintenance is the owner of the app says, oh, there's a problem or there's something that we need that we didn't think of. So reporting minor fixes or minor updates is something that will definitely happen as well. But that'll come from the person who had the app built, typically the research team that had it built.
All right. Well, this was a fantastic discussion or thank you so much, Sam. I want to be respectful of everybody's time since it is 3 o'clock, but there are a few other questions. If we didn't get to your question, please feel free to email us at support@NuRelm.com. We will be happy to answer. And again, there's a survey at the very end of the webinar that'll pop up in your browser. So we thank you so much, everybody, for your questions and for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Marina. Bye, everybody.
Bye.